Welcome to FreeThinking Ministries. I'm Josh Klein, your host here as always. Tim Stratton is joining me. The question before us today is, why does one particular atheist or agnostic stay that way, and how can we exhibit a conversation about faith and belief in a way that's respectful, but also would call people to question what they think, question what they believe?
Yeah, our guest today has really become one of my favorite people. I consider him to be a good friend, and he's not a Christian. In fact, what I love about our guest today is he often acts more Christian than many Christians do.
If you haven't already subscribed to the channel. Please like it, share it. I think this is going to be a good conversation. It's not going to be one with fireworks. We know that, but and sometimes that's what people want, but I think it's going to be good. So Dr. Tim Stratton, how are you today? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you bet, Josh. How are you doing?
I am doing just great because of who we're going to have as our guest.
Well, yeah, and you also had a debate yesterday and did really well. We want to encourage people to go watch that at Trinity Radio. You had a great conversation with Dr. Randall Rouser. So if you're seeing this, and you haven't seen that debate/discussion yet, make sure you go watch that. But good job, Josh. Made me proud. Made me proud. Yep.
Yeah. And you know what's funny is I'm actually going to enjoy this conversation much more than I enjoyed that one. So
definitely. Even though we have some huge disagreements on the biggest topics, we've found that we really have a deep friendship with each other now. In fact, I often refer to you and my other close Christian friends as brothers, and I mean that as short for brother in Christ. And our guest today exhibits so much of what I would call Christ-likeness, although he doesn't officially follow Christ. I often find myself calling him when we're together, "Hey, brother." And then I'm like, oh, wait, he's not technically a brother in Christ, and then I'm like, well, okay, brother in humanity or something, something like that. But he's just a really good guy who I'm proud to call a friend. So, Josh, why don't you bring him on?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I think that's part of his plan. That's part of his devious atheist
he's sneaky. Plan. I see how it is.
Yeah. So let's bring him on. He used to be known as the Atheist. Now he is the Fallen Ape-Theist. Richard Suttles, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, man. Thank you guys for having me.
You bet.
Yeah. So we've officially lathered you up like like you're the best thing since sliced bread, right? So you better not disappoint. That's the
right. I hope I'll try. I'll do my best.
Yeah. So those of you watching out in the YouTube verse, we're going to be covering like very specific topics. We got 5 specific questions. You're going to want to wait for the last one to stick around for the whole thing, because that's when it's all going to come to a head. And Richard may or may not declare his faith for Jesus Christ right at the end of this video. Probably not, but
or I could deconvert you guys.
That's true. All of a sudden, we become the FreeThinking Atheist channel. We'll see what happens. Only God and his middle knowledge knows.
Hey, before we get into the nitty gritty here, Richard, a couple weeks ago, had one of the saddest days of my life, and had to put my dog down. He was 15 years old, my best friend, and it was just so hard for me. And I wrote a little tribute to Rondo on Facebook, and I said I do sincerely have a reasonable hope that my dog is in heaven right now. And there's so many nice comments, but the one that meant the most to me probably was from you, and you said something to the effect of, "You're absolutely right. Rondo is in heaven right now." And I know that you don't really believe that, but you know that it would just mean so much to me. And so thank you for those kind words.
Thank you. And sometimes, honestly, I don't know if I don't mean it or not, because when I really care about a pet or a family member, even for someone else, I do kind of hope that that's the case. So I can't say that it's all a grandiose stand to make you feel better. I worry myself. Maybe worry is the wrong word, but I can see the allure of that, and sometimes it hits me.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I think that's a great segue into our conversation today. Richard, first of all, before we get into it, Richard, where can people find you? And you're a great follow on X, other places that people can find you to.
Yes, I'll send you my links that you can put in the comments. But I am on Facebook most often. I've dipped my toes into Twitter, and just barely made it to 500,000 followers on Twitter after 6 months. Twitter's tough. It's a different world. I am on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, and I'll send the links. Threads and BlueSky, I'm there, but you wouldn't know it. But I'll send all the links and I'll work on all those as I go forward.
Well, how can they find you on Truth Social?
I'm not on Truth Social. That's a good one. I'm not on LinkedIn. I'm not on LinkedIn or Truth Social.
I'm on LinkedIn, and sometimes I want to get off LinkedIn because it is, in my opinion, the most annoying social media platform.
Right. I stopped.
Right.
I'm still on it, but I stopped even looking at it. So.
Right. All right. Anyway, let's move forward. Richard, you are an agnostic or atheist. Which moniker do you use most, and what do they mean? Like in your view?
Well, I like to start with this one because it makes everybody angry, especially my answer. I agree that classically atheist used to mean that you're declaring there's no God. That was the original usage of the word. Now, in modern times, there's a lot of atheist organizations that say it just means that I don't believe. It's a suspension of belief. Now, the dictionary now records both, but I understand that in the philosophical world and among scholars, they tend to go with the classical definition. I'm more of the lack of belief. I've had Christians say, okay, well, then you're a little dog atheist. You're not a big dog. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, say whatever you want. The thing is, I don't know how to prove there's no God. I don't think that's ever going to be possible. So for me, it seems foolish to say there is no God. The best I can say is I'm not sure that there's a God that exists in the way that many people describe him, but that's not the same as no God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people would call that agnostic or whatever, and you're not necessarily averse to that term, but it's easier to go by atheist in a lot of ways.
Right, because I'm certainly I don't think that Christianity is true. I think that people came up with Christianity on their own without a signal from above. So a lot of atheists are like, okay, good enough. You can come to our Wednesday night suppers then. We'll give you that one.
At atheist church.
Yeah.
There are some atheist churches out there. They don't last long, I don't.
Right. But something like that. That's true.
Yeah. It's interesting how you've noted that term atheist has migrated over the years. And, I get frustrated with both sides of that conversation. And really at the end of the day, you just have to say, okay, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And, and I see this all the time, even amongst Christians when we're talking about different things. So the term free will has migrated. The term compatibilism can mean different things to different people. Even the way determinism is used can mean different things to different people. So I try to clarify these things. And really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you call it. It means what you mean by that. Or what's most important is what you mean by that. So it's the most important thing when having these conversations, and you and I have had a lot of them, is just clarifying, okay, what do you mean by that? And we don't have to say, well, then you shouldn't call yourself an atheist or anything like that. I just know what you mean, and we go on. And I think that's also why we get along so well, is because we just try to understand the other person.
Yeah, this is something I preach, and I use Southern Baptist language because I was raised Southern Baptist. But one of the things I preach is when you're talking to someone who's determined to use a word in a certain way, then during that conversation, stick with that. I think sometimes people want small victories, and they're like, if I can make you unstable over atheist versus agnostic, then maybe you're one step closer to towards what I want. But I don't know that that's a helpful strategy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't think it's helpful if you're wanting to help convince that person or change their mind. It could be a useful rhetorical device in like a debate to make your opponent sound less intellectual or something like that. Yeah. But it's not helpful in conversation.
Right. I agree.
Richard, for those watching, the stuff that we're going to talk about today, Richard and I and Tim and Richard, we've all had these conversations off camera before. So nothing probably that any of us is going to say is new, or something that is, there might be something that just pops into our heads that's new, but we've had these deep conversations before. So if you're watching going, well, why aren't they using this argument? Why aren't they using that? It's because we've had all those conversations before, and we're going to stick to what we've really seen as the biggest differences or the biggest things. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I would add two things. One is that we've also had this conversation, not this conversation, but other conversations on your show last year. That was more about a counterterrorism. That was right after the assassination attempt of Trump. And we just kind of talked logistically about how that could have been avoided. So there's another show of yours where I'm on it, if people want to watch that. And then also we've had these conversations, even though we've only known each other for a few years. All of us have had these conversations for decades. For me, I've had this since 1987 is the year that I started digging into what's true. So if someone says, "Hey, I wish he'd hear this argument," I'm like, okay, maybe it's something that I've, like I read Mere Christianity, 10 times by now. So
and you started with Scaling the Secular City.
Yeah, my first apologetics book was Scaling the Secular City by J.P. Moreland was my first apologetics book. My youth minister gave it to me. He had no idea what he was handing me, and he did not like apologetics. But he heard that like a smart guy had just written a book for skeptics. So he went and bought it and handed it to me real quick because he was just trying to get me to shut up. But once he heard it, he didn't like what J.P. Moreland had to say.
Now, you and I would both agree that Scaling the Secular City is a fantastic book that everybody should be aware of. It's a very good book.
And if you're not aware of it and you're a big fan of William Lane Craig, then you should absolutely read Scaling the Secular City, because I wouldn't be surprised if William Lane Craig's entire ministry isn't based on something along the lines of that book.
Interesting. Well, that book had a big impact on me. It was as I started getting into my initial thoughts about that are now known as the free thinking argument. One of my professors at Biola said, okay, before you do anything else, you're thinking along the same lines as J.P. Moreland here, and you need to read Scaling the Secular City. So yeah, I read that probably in 2012, 2013. It had a big impact on me, but you were reading it in the 80s.
Right. And it still holds up. The book still holds up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Richard, if you want to feel really old, you've been thinking about this since 1987, and I was born in 1987. So
wow, I do. I'm surprised I'm still here. That's all.
Well, he makes me feel old all the time, Richard. So
yeah. Despite the gray hair,
right.
I'm not that old.
I'm the only one here that doesn't have gray hair.
Right. Yeah. And Tim and I are pretty much the same age.
Yeah.
In our mid 50s.
Yeah. I'm 51.
Right. Oh, okay. Then I got you by fear. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So you're older and maybe wiser. We'll see as
we'll see. We'll see about this wiser stuff.
All right. So you talk about your lack of belief in God, and again, we've talked about all this before. But at the core of it, what would you say informs? I guess informs might not be the right word. What would you say lies at the core of the lack of belief in God for you?
Well, I had two life experiences that kind of informed my worldview, or really kind of got me started. And one is that I was raised Christian, and I started having questions. And then the way that not only my church handled it, but I would say the world kind of handled it, or at least my awareness, led me to believe that maybe religion is something where people come up with their own answers. And then they just, at some point, they just stop and say, this is it, I'm going to go with this. And then that puts you at odds with other religious people, but it kind of gives you a platform to work with. So that was my first experience. And I still think something like that is true. The second life experience was in the counterterrorism world, and I've been doing that since 1995, was studying these terrorists who were screaming at each other, and they were in their 90s, and they were screaming at each other, and they knew each other. They had grown up together, and so they had been raised since little boys to be imams, and they had they had memorized the Quran, and everything I'm saying now, I can tell you the story is long over now, but they and these guys are long gone. But the fact that they knew each other and they were educated together, and that they had split over something in their group, and now they were two separate factions, and they hated each other, and they were both accusing each other of not understanding the Quran or God or beauty or logic or math, or they were like, please learn some philosophy, please get a book. And I'm like, you guys have known each other your whole lives, you know that that's not true. But they had been convinced that this other person was now their mortal enemy, just because of affection. And I said, at that point, I said, there's something going on in our brains, and I don't know what it is, but there's something where that can happen, and it overrides all of their otherwise common sense. It's like this irrational thing that you grasp at, and it becomes sacred to you. And when I use the word sacred, it doesn't have to be holy. You can say it's something that's unassailable, something that you're like, no, I'm not going to budge. This is the thing. And these two guys had grasped onto something that made the other one their mortal enemy. And I was like, I don't neurologically know. At that point, I hadn't done any post-grad work. So I'm like, I don't know what that is, but it's something that would make these two guys do that.
Yeah.
And then as I began to watch people talk about politics and sometimes even sports, I said, you know what? This is not really about religion or terrorism. This is human nature. We all do that. So you can be like a zealot for doing something like a terrorist and kill people, but you could be a zealot for being the opposite of that, of trying to be helpful. So it just matters what it is that you hold as sacred. I use the word sacred again. Something that you think is like, this is not going to budge. This is who I am. I began to see that we all have that. So those two experiences, thinking that truth isn't coming from a God, and thinking that we all find some sort of truth. And I know this dabbles into relativism, and we'll get into that later, but we do all find some sort of truth, and then that becomes our platform for how we navigate reality. So those two are that's kind of the basis of my worldview.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say, I actually agree with a whole bunch of what you said there. I do think there's something in human nature that highly influences us to be tribal like that. Sometimes I have to examine myself and ask others to hold me accountable as well. Both of you have done that in my life, and to make sure I'm not going in that direction. What I would say that's interesting is that each of us, and each one of us here, we have exhibited these, I think, mental actions which have stopped us from going there. So what's interesting to me is that even though most or many humans do that, it seems like we have the kind of power available to us that we don't have to do that. And this is really what gets us to the free thinking argument, especially the paper that I authored with JP Moreland. Was by the end, we're looking like we offer 4 different live options that could explain our metaphysical beliefs, and I think even theological beliefs. That would include even the theological beliefs that atheists and agnostics would hold. But there's 4 different options, and really the only option that shows us that we are free thinkers and that we can take those thoughts captive, as it were, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10:5, before bad thinking takes us, as Paul says in Colossians 2:8, is I think the Christian worldview. And JP and I showed that if God doesn't exist, we shouldn't expect to have that kind of a power. And really, we need more than God. We would need a maximally great being and a God of truth that desires all people to know the truth, which is what the New Testament makes clear. But with that said, I can see how your experiences would influence you heavily to take a step back and say, hey, this can't be right. And as you know, you've seen Christians fight with each other as much as those imams were fighting with each other. I live in that world, right?
And atheists, I want to say my side does it just as much. It's just there's not as many of us.
I've seen atheists and agnostics go after you, because you're too nice to Christians, right?
They see that, in fact, they see that as weakness or complicit, that I'm complicit, or that I'm secretly one of you, and this is all kind of a game to kind of bring them into the fold.
Well, that's funny because we just joked that you were secretly trying to act nice so you could eventually take us down, right?
Yeah,
right.
So that can get lodged at you from both directions as well. So you're right. There is something in human nature that does this, but I think there's also something to human nature, and I think it's speaking of nature, a supernatural thing that we get from God, is that we do have the power to be free thinkers and take those thoughts captive before they take hold of us and captivate us. So that'd be, you and I have talked about that before. Yeah. Also, how you were raised as a Christian, even though you don't believe the worldview anymore, and you see how the church handled that was improper. I think that's one of the reasons why you are so much fun to be around with, and why you do. I do say, even though you're not following Christ, you exhibit Christ's attitude many times, even though you're not following him. And I think that's because you were raised in the church. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, very much when I say I'm Southern Baptist, or raised Southern Baptist, that was just a huge part of my upbringing, and I saw a lot of people who are really good at navigating life. So it's true that my church authorities didn't handle my doubts very well; they weren't trained for that. And something my youth minister told me years and years and years later is he said, that's how we were raised in the 50s. When we came up in the 50s, if we had a question, they would announce it at first. They're like, "Oh, what a great question!" Then they would give you the answer, and that was it. There's no more discussion. Everyone who heard that, done. And if you kept asking questions, then they would say, "Hey, what's really going on? Is it girls? Is it drugs?"
Even if it wasn't a good answer,
right?
They just you better accept that. Now
so I learned that,
and you were fortunate enough to at least get some answers. I know a lot of Christians. Right. I saw this too growing up a little bit. Hey, you just need to have more faith. Stop asking tough questions. At least they allowed you one question.
Right. They're like, is something wrong with you if you keep asking questions? Yeah. That's the message I got.
And all three of us to this would say, no, you should not do that. Keep asking questions, express doubts that you have, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. And we're all on a journey now too.
Like case in point, my wife is Christian and I'm not, and one of our daughters is at least a believer in something. Yeah. And then the other daughter is like, no, it's just all crap. I never raised them to be, you've got to join a religion or that you have to say it's all crap. The one who says it's all crap learned that in elementary school. And then the one who believes in something is just looking at the world and saying, look at all this stuff. She's like, there's got to be something. So when they have questions for me, I don't say, hey, you need to, let go of the God stuff, or you need to, join this. If you're going to be religious, it better be with this religion. Yeah. I don't do it. I'm like, keep asking your questions. Tell me what you think. I'll tell you what I think.
That's good. One of the follow-up questions I have to this one is, do you feel like which do you feel like was, I guess, more transformative in your journey of lack of faith, I guess, the initial reaction to the question and your recognition of those tribal instincts, or the living in the counter-terrorist regime and seeing that all over the world? Which one do you think solidified it, I guess, would be the best term?
Actually, it was another experience that solidified it for me. It was a third experience. So after I had realized that I didn't think that Christianity was true and that maybe people are just kind of making their own answers. And this was before my thing with the terrorism experience. I was just at another church. I was visiting another church, and there was this girl that I liked. And of course, her family said, well, you got to come to church with us. And it was in South Dakota. So I wasn't too far from you. I was in Rapid City. And by now I had kind of let go of Christianity. I was kind of hanging on by a thread. And I was shoveling the driveway to the church. It was like on the side of a mountain. And I was shoveling the driveway to the church with this old guy who was who worked at the church. He's just this old guy who was there, and I was kind of throwing all my questions out because at this point I don't want to say panicking, but at this point I'm like, I'm here because I have to be in order to date this girl, but at the same time I'm curious as to why I don't think it's true, and all these people do, and I'm throwing out all these. What about the Bible saying this, and what about people who do that? And this guy who's shoveling the driveway said, I don't know the answers to any of these questions, and I've been here my whole life, and I don't know anything I don't understand anything that you're asking me. He says, but I guarantee you this, if I don't shovel this driveway, they can't get up the mountain. They're going to come up and they can't get up here. This is what I do. I make sure that this driveway, so you want to come here and you want to help me, you come here at 8:00 every morning and we'll shovel this driveway. And I was like, that is my religion. I'm like, somebody's got to do this driveway. It's got to happen. That might have even affected me finally decided to join the Marines. And I was like, and so he called himself a Christian, but he's like, I don't understand all the stuff in the Bible. I don't understand all this, but I do understand this driveway is going to be, in certain times of the year. It's not like Rapid City is always snow covered, but during the times when it is snow covered, it's got to be him. And that really became my, for me, I'm like, I can dedicate myself to something pragmatic like that.
But here's a great example of, I just posted on Facebook about this in the last week or two. And, sharing the gospel is much more than just your actions. It's you need to know the right words to say as well. What's the quote from St. Francis of Assisi?
I don't think he ever said it, but
okay, it's attributed to him.
It's attributed to him. It's preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words.
I saw your post on that.
Okay, yeah. Now the guy that was shoveling snow, he was preaching the gospel with his actions, and he didn't know how to express it to you or to answer your questions. But he was like, "But hey, I'm going to shovel this snow because that's how I can show love to people." Now praise God. They're right. We do have to show love with our actions. So you have to. But this story right here is also a good encouragement for Christians watching. It's good to use words too and to have rational answers. And I was challenged in the exact same way, Richard. You know this story back in 2008 when a young man was asking me probably the same questions that you were asking him. And I said the same thing that he said initially. I don't know how to answer any of those. But instead of saying, but I just got to keep shoveling, I said, I'm going to go find the answers. And I dedicated my life to that, and it changed my life. But it's interesting to see the different reactions to those questions.
Yeah.
And I think it shows why we do what we do in a lot of ways, Tim, with the apologetics and that stuff. Why, and maybe even, and this is me just spitballing here, Richard. Do you find that's why you hang out with this group of apologists so much, is because they're seeking to answer those questions in a way that you didn't see? Because you go to apologetics conference, that sort of thing. And obviously we're just awesome people, but other than that.
Actually, I learned a lot of this from Christians because I noticed that, there would be people attacking each other and screaming at each other. And then there would be Christians who would go to mosques and go to Buddhist events and go to Hindu events and go to atheist meetings. Not even to speak, but just like, hey, I'm a Christian. I just want to hear you and understand you. Also, when I would give a brief on terrorists, sometimes that would be to people who were Christian. It wasn't necessarily. Sometimes we'll give a lecture to church executives because they're thinking about an attack against their building. But sometimes it would just be Christians in the audience who would say, I'm not so much kill them all. I'm just trying to understand. I want to understand. Yeah. I want to kind of get into that world just to understand their mind. That inspired me. So I began to think, if I'm going to really take on this other crowd, I need to be in their world. I can't just, I can't build my own world. And I think there's several atheists now who have built their own world, but they wouldn't be called dead at a church because for them, that would be, that would be a sin. So I wanted to go the opposite way and start with you guys. If I'm going to do this, I wanted to start with you guys.
Well, you do a great job of that. I know I speak for so many of us that are in that circuit, speaking at Christian apologetic conferences, that we love having you there. And with there's my Maven logo. Work for an
That's right.
organization called Maven,
Yep.
and we hire you. We bring you in around the
Yes.
country to come talk to our kids.
Yes.
And people are like, why in the world would you do that? But
Yep.
it's because we want to show them how to have conversations with those who have different worldviews.
Yep.
And how to try to have rational, logical, and loving, respectful conversations at the same time. We know we're going to get that from you.
Right.
And I think you'd say most of the students or these teenagers are learning how to do that as well.
Right.
But just let me say that I love sharing the stage with you, as it were, at these events. And even when students are interacting with you, here's what I like about you. You're not actively trying to destroy their faith. Right. You're merely arguing why you hold your belief. Yes. And in the conversations, if they bring up something and you think that's a good point, one of the things that has blown my mind is when I heard you say, that's a good question. That's points for you. That's points for your worldview. Yeah. And you're not, how many atheists would you hear say that? Right. And I think they've learned to share that with you when you bring up something good, like, hey, I never thought of that before. Thanks for giving me something to think about. What do you think?
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoy those experiences. It helps me deliver how I see it. I've been doing this for a few years now with you guys, and now Stand to Reason and Ratio Christi have joined ranks to have me do that. And then some churches just on their own have me. And then recently a couple of colleges have had me come out to debate on certain issues. Yeah. So I've really enjoyed that. That helps me in my delivery. And my big ministry, again, using your guys' language, my big thing is to know what you're about, know what your values and standards are, know why that you have them, and be able to talk about them and represent them, and have part of that be understanding other people rather than necessarily defeating them. Mm-hmm. So that's my message more than non-belief.
And I think you do a good job of calling people to consistency. I know you, if you follow us on X, Josh R. Klein, or the Fallen Ape-Theist, you and I interact regularly on X, especially on political topics, and you're and you're consistently being, hey, remember to be consistent here, and I appreciate that. I think we have a good relationship when it comes to that sort of stuff. Right. So you value consistency, you value thoughtfulness, and I think that's why we get along so well. I wanted to pivot real quick. This was not in our notes, but there were two things that came up today. One an hour ago, and the other one a little bit longer ago that I wanted to discuss real quick with this group. One is a post from you on Facebook today. Okay. You said, I suspect theology is not a real thing. Right. I mean, people get into it. I see that. I'm just saying it's all based on nothing more than what religious people, admittedly, genuinely, think are God's qualities and expectations. Now, if it is a real thing, then may God alone have mercy upon most theologians, because the vast majority of them have to be wrong. All right. Do you want to unpack that a little bit? And then I'd love to have just a quick discussion on that.
Sure. So you're right. And I came to this in my early 20s. So like I said before, my late teens to my early 20s was that 6 or 7 year period where I began to walk away, slowly as heck from Christianity. But yeah, I did come down on, I think that what religion is people have questions. First of all, they assume there's something. And I think atheists need to come to terms with this. Most people assume there's something. And I think it would take a whole lot of work to not assume that. And I get tragedies. But my thing with tragedies is that people hear that God is a very certain way and that certain things can't happen. And then those things happen. And then that person says, okay to all of it. Forget all of it. None of that can be the truth. But I think it's hard for that to happen. Most people think that there's something. And so that part I get, and I don't even push back when someone talks about fine tuning or, argument of, something had to start all this. That doesn't bother me at all. But then I do think from there, we come up with our own ideas, and you can be as skilled in philosophy and metaphysics as you want. But it's like those two theologians, well, I say theologians, these two guys that I was talking about that were from Morocco that eventually, are no longer with us. They knew everything about philosophy and metaphysics and logic that you could ever imagine. But they still came up with their own story about what God expected. And for me, speaking of defining terms, I'm defining theology as the qualities of God and the expectations of God. or gods if if you believe in multiple. And I'm thinking we all come up with our own stories with that. It becomes sacred to us or unassailable to us. And then we defend that and uphold it. And then we go after people who don't agree. And then from there, it's how are you going to go after them? Are you going to scream at them? Are you going to treat them respectfully? Again, that has to be part of your values and your ministry is how you're going to deal with people who don't agree. But in my mind, it's all not true. It's just more of a reflection of the theologians themselves.
So I would say that you're doing theology. You have a
Right,
theological view.
And I agree with that. If you're saying there's no theology, that's still sort of you're still making a statement about the great beyond.
Right. Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, at least we can say we're doing metaphysics together. I think theology is under the umbrella of metaphysics.
Okay.
And I spend most of my time in that world doing metaphysics and theology. But again, I got to bring back the free thinking argument here, because when you said most theologians have to be wrong,
right?
Amen to that. Again, that's where I live. Right? Yeah, you win. Hey, this will break the internet. Richard Suttles is right. Most theologians have to be wrong because of all these contradictory statements.
Right.
And that's where I live then as a systematic theologian, trying to analyze, especially the statements coming from Christians. And we if we don't have a systematic approach, then that means that our theology is not coherent, and that is the number one reason to doubt something. And so my job is really to see, is there coherence to Christianity? And I think there is. And one of the things I would say to that is, because you're right that most theologians have to be wrong, I say that really again, to bring up the paper I did with JP, this is what we talk about. Graham Oppie, an atheist philosopher, just talking about metaphysics, points out that there's hardly a majority agreement on any metaphysical issue among metaphysical professionals and philosophers, right? PhDs.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And so that means there's this metaphysical disagreement all over the metaphysical map.
Right.
And so the question then becomes, why is there all this disagreement even among epistemic peers in metaphysics and theology? And JP and I offer 4 different options here. Now you say we come up with our own ideas on these things, but I would just say, well, then if atheism is true, it's either mindless stuff that knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if we do either, determining these ideas that we come up with. It's not really up to us. It's mindless stuff that does that, or it's completely random, or if some kind of deity exists, it'd be a deity who determines all of our false beliefs on metaphysics and theology, or it would be that we are the kind of creatures who can be careful and could have done otherwise and could have exercised an ability to infer truth about metaphysics and theology if we were careful to do our due diligence. And I explain this, you'll like this as a former Marine, I explain this as a sniper rifle. And I say the sniper rifle is an intelligently designed and finely tuned machine that is designed to hit targets miles away. I don't know what the furthest one is.
Right.
Maybe not miles, but it's a long ways away.
It would be tough to do a mile, not impossible, but usually, hundreds of yards.
Yeah. Chris Kyle, he's famous for that. So this machine is intelligently designed and finely tuned to be able to hit targets a long ways away. But it's not going to happen on its own. It requires a highly trained sniper who can choose to practice with it, can choose to be careful with it, to do his due diligence. And then if he handles that weapon carefully, he can hit the target of truth a long ways away. And I say that our cognitive faculties are like that. I believe that the best explanation of what we're doing right now, even metaphysics, is that we have these intelligently designed and finely tuned cognitive faculties, which if we practice with them regularly, if we do our due diligence, if we're careful to have iron sharpening conversations with those who see things differently, and we can reason together, as Isaiah 1:18 says, to all come closer to the truth, then we can use these cognitive faculties in such a way to hit targets of metaphysical truth, metaphysical miles away. But we shouldn't expect to be able to do that unless a God, at least similar to the one that Jesus revealed in the New Testament, exists. So it definitely would be compatible on that Christian view. I don't think we should expect to be doing what we're doing right now in metaphysics and some theology if there wasn't some kind of a God of truth who desired all people to know the truth. What do you think about?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that I get into these conversations a lot, especially because now that I've been doing this for a few years, I've talked, as you guys know, I've been able to talk to so many different Christian scholars and great Christian minds, and that's usually what they say is the fact that we can even go down this road must mean that there's some sort of designer who's allowing us and it gives us this capability. I do want to give like a shortcut answer, which is I tell everybody when it comes to free will, act like you do. Wake up in the morning like you have a set of goals and act like you're chasing those goals. Because if you say, hey, I'm just going to let life happen to me, whatever, go ahead, life, do what you will. If you do that, you're going to live a much different life. So even if it's all a deception, even if we're all fooling ourselves, then go down that road anyway. So act like you do have it. And then I would say, even if we prove that all of natural forces can get together into some sort of a problem-solving capability, you still wouldn't disprove God. It could still very well be that there's a God who wanted a reality that's like that.
And that,
I like that answer. Is my basic answer.
That's kind of Stephen Meyer's whole Return of the God hypothesis argument. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've read that book. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the only known thing to generate information is a mind. And if our reality is composed of primarily information, then we should believe that a mind generated or created our reality, because we discover facts about reality. We don't invent things about reality. We invent ways to describe it. I think someone said if all of our textbooks on math got burned up, we would discover all the same principles. We just might use different symbols, right? So,
right, yeah, I think you and I talked about that, or at least I've posted on that. One thing, and especially for you, Tim, I think there's a lot of new scientific advancements coming up about what's going on at the small scales of reality. So as you move forward in your ministry, I think there's going to be a lot of cool things to kind of take a new look at what's happening. One of the latest waves that's taken hold in the last couple of years has been this idea that all intelligence is collective intelligence. And so what this one particular scientist, his name is Michael Levin, is saying, he's saying the very first example of intelligence ever was a collection of things that weren't intelligent, but the way they interacted with each other created some type of an intelligence. And if that turns out to be true, and I'm not saying that he's discovered, reality, but if it does turn out that that's true, even though Stephen Meyer would be wrong about information requires a mind, you could still say that there's a God who created a reality where a collective of non-intelligent things could get together and interact in rules that govern their interaction to create an intelligence. So you'll never, for all you atheists who are looking at Michael Levin saying he's going to get me out of Stephen Meyer, it won't. It'll just get you to another brand of theism.
Yeah. You and I had talked about this before too. One of the we touched on it briefly. You sent me a direct message on X, and I think it was a picture of a conversation between two Christians, and they were calling each other evil, like actually using the word evil.
Yeah.
And you said Christians calling each other evil, based simply on loyalty to Trump, I think is what it was. I can't remember exactly. I'm trying to look back on the DMs here. And I was like, hey, we need to have a conversation about this. And I asked the question in that DM, hey, is this the sort of thing that contributes not contributes to your disbelief, but because like that would be kind of ridiculous to say, well, I don't believe because these specific two people are fighting.
Right.
But that keeps you, I guess that undergirds it a little bit too. Like, see, there is no system where all of a sudden all these people are, as Tim described, careful enough where they're not falling into these tribal sects even among their own groups. Is that fair to say? Is that kind of something that you
for me, it's more like when, again, talking about preaching, I always tell people, you're going to have something in your mind that's sacred. And if you're an atheist and you hate the word sacred, then it's going to be inviolable. It's going to be unassailable. It's going to own you. It's going to own your mind. And then your actions and your thoughts are going to kind of flow from that. It's just going to happen. So I'm always like, I say something like, take your thoughts captive, and that be careful what that is. And you'll know what it is because you won't be able to speak against it. And if there's anything that you can't speak against, then that should set off alarms to say, okay, well, what if I get misled with this? And I just say it's human nature. I'll say the same thing about alcohol and pretty girls on TikTok. You can get lost in that. And so I'm not saying never, ever notice a pretty girl or never, ever have a great Jack and Coke. But at the same time, know that kind of stuff can take you and run with you if you're not careful. So that's how I approach that. It's going to happen. You're going to be faced with it. Be careful how you deal with it.
Well, and that's another reason why we at Maven love to have you come talk to our students.
I tell the kids that.
Yeah, you're giving them the same. You're telling them the same thing that we're telling them there. Yeah. And I remember at one point when you were talking, I think I just interrupted you, and I'm like, "Amen to that." I'm like, all of you, listen to him when he's exactly.
That happens at my work too, because we'll have like old grizzled people who've been there for years, and we'll get young up and coming bucks, and some of them are making mistakes in life, that have to do with girls and alcohol, and some of the guys will give Christian answers, like, hey, God doesn't want you to do that, and they know that I'm not religious, but I'll tell them the same thing. I'm like, no, you still shouldn't be doing that, but don't worry about whether God says it or not. Here's what's going to happen to you. You're 20, and so you don't see this, but when you're 30, you're going to look back and you're going to see this and this and this happened because you're thinking this. And in my case, a lot of that was trial and error. It's not like I was born with wisdom. I tried to do it the wrong way. And then I was like, okay, I think this is not going the way I want it to go. And so I revisited how I do things, and I'm just passing that wisdom on. So a lot of my coworkers learn not from biblical, it could still be true, but not because God says, but because it really can be damaging. And when they hear it from me, sometimes that helps them take it more seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a few things to that. I love that. One is that I think this shows why I have argued in the past that if something like pornography is going to be legal, it is not like voting. It is not like owning a firearm. It is something that messes with your mind. So it should be treated more like a drug than anything. So the age should be when the mind is more fully developed, because I see all these girls ruining their lives going on OnlyFans because they haven't even thought about the long-term implications. And like most earners are only making like $300 a month on OnlyFans, and now you've got all these pictures out there. And even if the money is worth it, and I will argue that the money is not worth your soul in that regard, then I think we'd be on the same track there. So that's like that money is captivating these girls' minds, but they don't realize they're putting their entire future at risk because of it. In 20 years, they'll look back and who knows what does the money mean then? So I think you're 100% spot on with that.
Go ahead. I wanted to give one quick caveat on this. A lot of my conversations with other guys that I know, either my age, and it's not always at work, but just in life, I'm not even talking about pornography. I'm talking about, you go to TikTok and there's a really pretty girl, and she's not doing anything pornographic, but she is, excessively pretty, and you swipe and there's another one. And so sometimes I'll see my friends and I'll say, look, I do that with Theology and Atheist, swipe, swipe, swipe. But if you do that with this, that might take up way more of your time than you. So I preach against not just pornography, but I preach against having your TikTok know that that's your thing. I think that can be damaging as well.
100%.
You guys are exactly right on that. Sometimes when our budget is tight at home, I joke around with my wife and I say, well, you might have to start an OnlyFans. And it is a joke. We joke about that. Some people at first, and they thought we were being serious.
We're going to edit that part out.
Total joke. Yeah. But we've talked about that. I'm like, it would destroy. It's not worth it. Even if she could make millions of dollars, I'm sure she could, right? But it would destroy our marriage. It would destroy our lives. It would destroy our soul. It is not worth millions of dollars. I'd rather pinch pennies.
Yeah. So Richard, one of the follow-ups I wanted to have with that is, and again, the caveat is, you've heard all of these before. I want to get these out as we're having this conversation. But when we talk about being able to pursue the truth and that there are factions fighting, I think that's true, and I think a lot of it is human nature, like we've talked about. But it seems to me that there is kind of a unique situation that Christians find themselves in, where even our scriptures will say, hey, everything that Richard said is clearly true, and that's why our highest aim, this is kind of like a Jordan Peterson sort of style of, hey, whatever you set your mind as the highest goal, that's going to be your God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so the scriptures, like Tim has quoted Paul here, hey, don't, even in Proverbs, hey, guard your heart, because from out of it flows the wellspring of life, basically saying whatever you put into yourself, garbage in, garbage out sort of thing, and whatever's your highest ideal, that's where your pursuits are going to be. Could it be that humanity is geared that way, and we're constantly erring in our pursuit of the highest thing, and God is saying, I'm trying to make it as simple, but making it still require faith here for you to pursue me as the highest good, and I sent my son Jesus Christ to do that. It seems to me that Christianity is unique in that respect. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think Christianity is unique, and I've argued before with other Christians about that if we could go back in time and keep Christianity from happening, obviously we can't stop God, but what if we could stop all the people who led to Christianity? I'm saying there would still be something. It might not be as dominant or even as effective as what Christianity did. And I give Christianity credit a lot. All the stuff that Tom Holland, the historian, said, and the thing J. Warner Wallace said in Person of Interest, and I give Christianity a lot of credit there. I would say there still would be something that talks about, hey, you're going to have these things that kind of own your self-interest, but if you don't have something that's community-centric and family-centric, then we're not going to be here. And I agree, we wouldn't be here if you don't have some sort of family-centric and community-centric sacred things going on in your mind that drives you and changes your behavior and your mindset. I don't know if that makes Christianity true, but it just means that if our species is still here, then we have some sort of accountability-centered norms that maybe just came from our minds, but it had to be that way or we wouldn't still be here. So I don't know if that makes it Christianity true, but it does say that there was something about Christianity that we needed.
Yeah. Do you think we would expect that on naturalism?
Well, this is the way that naturalism was kind of sold by the new atheists over the past few decades, was that, hey, it's like here's a particle chart, this answers everything, and then stop talking after that. I think underneath that particle chart, no. Naturalism would have to be something more like what Michael Levin is saying. There's another author called Blaise Aguera. There's a few scientists now, and they're not Matt Gasser. That can't be right. I'll have to look up some of these names, and I'll include them when I send my links. But some of these scientists now are saying that there's something about reality that gears towards problem solving. Kevin Mitchell is another one. And they're saying that if there's something about problem solving, then you're just going to have things that get better and better at it. But so under that form of naturalism, then it could be that life is trial and error, and then those that succeed are still here, and those that don't succeed aren't. And that sounds kind of cold, but I could at least see how that would get us here. Now, that still doesn't disprove theism. It just would be a different kind of God, if that's the case.
I think that is, I think that's right. I think we can at least imagine or conceive of a world where that kind of a thing happens, and given the survival of the fittest, those who can do problem solving to help us survive and eventually procreate, we can see how that could happen.
Yeah.
What I argue, though, is I push further and I say, given that all these PhD metaphysicians, as Graham Oppy said, are all over the metaphysical map, obviously, whatever is involved with this problem solving it's pretty dang clumsy when it comes to metaphysics.
Yeah.
And so we would have undercutting defeaters to all these metaphysical beliefs if it's mindless stuff ultimately getting together, determining our thoughts and beliefs about metaphysics, when this mindless stuff doesn't even know anything about metaphysics and doesn't care if we do either. It seems to just care about our survival and our procreation, where we can, I mean, you look at, I think we would all say that Muslims and Mormons are, they get their metaphysics wrong, but it leads to fantastic procreation,
Right.
and so
Right.
I think there's something to what you're saying, but I'd like to gently nudge people to go past that and to think about what we're doing right now. And that's what Alex Malpass and we had a debate a little over a year ago on the Unbelievable YouTube channel. And
yeah, we'll be releasing a short on that.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
Or we are?
We are.
Oh, yeah, good. I thought you said they were. He was trying to defend the position of atheism/determinism. And at the end, I think I was able to show him why those two things married together aren't going to work. And so he said, okay, well, atheism plus libertarian freedom can still be a thing. I don't have to just say I don't have libertarian freedom. And then I said, well, what should we expect? Should you have the kind of libertarian freedom that first of all, should you expect to have it? Second of all, should you trust your ability to do metaphysics when metaphysicians are all over the map? Why should you expect to have it on atheism? And I said, but if Christianity is true, we would expect to be that kind of a free thinking being who can infer the truth about ultimate reality. Because that's what the New Testament is clear that it states that we do have that. And I said, that's what we're doing right now, is we're doing metaphysics. And according to the New Testament, we're the kind of creatures that have that power. So I think at the end, I think you're right. I think so much of what you say is right. I'm just, as your friend, gently nudging you to think about taking that extra step across that metaphysical line.
And obviously, we wouldn't be good Christian friends if we weren't trying to.
Yeah, I'm still trying to convert you, and you know that. You know that.
Yeah.
I'm not hiding that.
Because if we think you have a soul, and if we think that your soul is in peril, we would be horrible friends if we did not tell you that and did not want you to declare your faith in Jesus Christ. Obviously, on this podcast, that might not happen. But with that in mind, and again, I think I sent you in this message when we first started. I said, hey, feel free to turn all of these back on us.
Yeah.
If anybody's watching, going, hey, these guys feel like they're ganging up on Richard. I hope you don't feel like that.
No, not at all.
But I just
we squared up once. We'll do it again.
That's right. We got pictures. Yeah. We have pictures for people who don't know.
It's a free flowing conversation. We have a working relationship that we knew this wouldn't feel like a 2-on-1 sort of deal. So just in case people are thinking that. With that in mind, I think the next question we had was, hey, if you've liked the content so far, boy, have we got a deal for you. We are only funded by viewers like you, not like PBS, who gets all the money from the state and stuff like that, only funded by people who believe in the mission of Free Thinking Ministries. So please join us. You can join us at freethinkingministries.com/donate. That's freethinkingministries.com/donate. We exist so that we can help people apply logic and sound theology to all aspects of life. And we're doing that here on this very podcast. So please do that. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Never miss an episode. Now, back to our conversation. If there was a thing that would maybe switch your mind, and you can feel free to turn this on us as well, that would maybe cause you to start to journey back towards belief in Christ, what would that be? Is there something right now that gives you pause, that goes, you know what? Maybe this is worth considering again. How would you answer that question?
Well, I think, similar to many people, whenever something works out amazingly that you didn't expect, then you're like, wow, that can't have been a coincidence. One of the things that pushes back on that in my own mind is that, for some people, things work out absolutely the wrong way. And so for them, I can easily see why they would say, look, it's all chaotic and, we're just lucky to be here. But, being in that bubble that so far things have worked out, I can see how there's moments and I'm like, man, you telling me this is an accident? All I'll say is that if it goes the other way and in my final moments, I can also see how I would be like, okay, this was, my turn for it to not go well.
Yeah.
So that does move me, but I also understand how the other way can move me as well. I do think that if any religion is true, this goes back to what I was saying, that post I made about how most theologians are wrong. I do think there's only one source that will ever settle the debate, and that is God. That is God coming down.
Yeah.
I liken this to like if I had 12 kids, or if I was a CEO and I had like 12 executives that fell underneath me. And if I'm the dad and my 12 kids are all saying, hey, I just talked to dad, this is what dad wants. The other one's like, no, I just talked to dad, this is what dad wants. Or if I'm the CEO and I lovingly step back and go to Tahiti and let all of my executives run the company. And one executive is like, hey, I just talked to Fallen Ape-Theist, this is what he wants. And they're all disagreeing with each other. There's only one man who can clear that up. Only one guy, and it's going to be me. And if I don't step forward and force my existence, then I'm a bad dad. And if I don't step forward and clarify my existence and my intent and set the other one straight, I'm a bad CEO. So, and in this respect, people all over the world, even Christians, will be like, yeah, I would call you a bad father, and I would call you a bad CEO if you lovingly remained hidden and let them learn on their own at the expense of the well-being of your family and your organization, because your family is ultimately your responsibility and your organization is ultimately your responsibility. And you stayed away and you let these other people even genuinely mislead everybody under your name. That was wrong. And I think, there's Christian, I forget Craig Groeschel, I forget his name.
Yeah.
That's his name, Groeschel.
He writes books about this for everything other than God. He's like, if you're going to be a good leader or a good father, you need to have clear communication and you need to establish your parameters. I'm like, you've got it. This guy's got it exactly right, except when it comes to hiddenness. And so I think that's a problem for you guys. And I also think it's the only possible source that will clear up the confusion.
Well, now that you said that, I've got to say two things.
Okay.
I agree with you again, 100%. Yeah. If a maximally great being exists, we would expect him to reveal truth to the world.
Right.
And that's what Jesus did. And that's why we have the Bible, that is the most read book in the history of the planet. And that revelation is clear. We know, I believe I possess knowledge of that. And yeah, so we should expect a maximally great being to do that. And Josh and I believe that he did that 2,000 years ago. Regarding the hiddenness, I've published on that in academic journals. I don't know if you've seen that. But I think, my co-author.
I think you mentioned it in the book that you gave me. I know that was mostly based on your thing with JP Moreland, but it seemed like you covered hiddenness in that book too.
Oh yeah. Did I give you the Faith Examined book?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I touched on that in my chapter. I touch on it, but I don't give the entire thing. That's
this segment brought to you by Faith Examined. Please check it out.
It's a good book. Yeah. My buddy Eric Hernandez and Elisa Childers, who we'll be hanging out with tonight, Josh. Or I'll take part of that, Sean McDowell. The hiddenness argument, I'm biased, but yeah, I wrote an article.
Me too.
That I think I think kind of, for lack of a better word, as Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 10:5, destroys that objection. I've published it 2 to 3 years ago now, and still haven't seen any defeaters to that. So I don't think hiddenness is a problem.
Well,
number one,
I just want to say, I don't know that what I'm saying is a defeater, but I'm just saying that it is the source that would sway me. It would persuade me if God stepped forward. And then the reason why I kind of pushed it the way I did, it was that I don't say that to be dismissive. I really think it's the only possible way. And so without that, it seems like I'm reasonable to still be skeptical. That's how I pitch that.
Yeah. So I'll close with the conversation with these. No, go ahead.
And I know Tim has a second point. I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, okay. Tim, did you have a? I think
no,
that
I was just going to say I don't think. Yeah, I thought. Both of your points, or I don't know if you call them objections or the points you made, I think are valid, and I think we should take those seriously. And that's why I wrote a whole paper on hiddenness. It's not like I'm just dismissing that. I'm like, this deserves a 30-page academic, rigorous paper, because this is a good objection. And I think with that said, I don't think it's a problem anymore. Was it a problem beforehand? You bet. I think it was the best objection against Christianity I've ever seen, and that's why I spent so much time with it. But secondly, I think the other thing I had in mind was just that we would expect a maximally great being to step in and tell us the truth, and I think we have good reason to believe that he did that 2,000 years ago.
So when Richard and
but both of those are great points. I 100% agree with you on your points.
When we had this conversation about a year and a half ago in Salado, shout out to Salado, Texas, at the Cowboy Church.
The Cowboy Church.
I think I asked the question, like, are you saying that God should step down, like, visibly in front of every single person, and because he's maximally great, he's maximally good God, what keeps him from doing so? The objection to saying, well, Jesus came, because that was the thing that I said was basically what Tim said was, well, Christians are unique in the belief that Jesus has come down and dwelt among us, is fully God, fully man, and did share with us expectations of how we ought to believe and how we ought to live life, and said that I would send a helper to help organize that. And we've seen, like you said, that Christianity did take hold, and there were bad actors, obviously, throughout history that didn't listen to the Spirit and chose to go their own way. But that was kind of something that you responded to as well, not just with what would convince you specifically, obviously, would be God. Now, so if God did appear to you and say, hey, by the way, it's me, I'm God, do you think you would believe, or would you be like, well, I must have eaten some bad mushrooms?
No, I think if he answered all my questions, like if it's just like a dream, then then I would be skeptical. But if he does what you guys are doing, if he's like, okay, I'm here, ask me all your questions, and I have all my biblical questions and my world questions, and who's going to heaven and hell and why, and he answers all the questions for me, and I'm going to trust my senses. The only thing I would do is that I would tell him, although he would know that I would tell him this, I would say, that you've got me now. I'm with you now because you've convinced me. I'm going to start changing my story, but that I'm not going to change the world, right? That a lot of people are going to call me a liar. They're going to say that, that I'm hallucinating, but I'm sold. And he's going to be like, yeah, that's all I wanted. I want you to be sold. And I know that I've changed your life. I don't expect you to change the world, but I would at least go and say, hey guys, I've received new information. I know it sounds unique to me, but hey, Paul did that. Paul said, hey, I'm the only one that's got this. So you never know. But for me, that would do it for me. And I do agree that a lot of people, even with that, they might say, well, I still don't want to do it, or maybe I dreamed it. I'm sure that would happen. I'm just saying, for me, I would trust my senses and go with that.
Yeah. Okay. So I like to run this thought experiment by people. And I think I've done this with you before, so I don't think you'll be surprised. But so if you found yourself, you got run over by a semi truck today, and you open your eyes on the other side of death, and you're face to face with Jesus, and you realize, wow, this is true. And let's just say that all of a sudden you're aware of all the really good answers to all of your objections and everything too. I mean, would you fall at his feet and want to love him, or would you just be scared of what might happen if you don't?
I've been thinking about this for 30 years because, real quick, I don't know whether I want to tell you the story first or answer your question first, but I guess I'll answer your question first. But for 30 years, I've thought about what I would do in this situation. I would hope that as my mind is being filled with the answers, my mind would also be filled with what to do in that situation. Right now, a lot of it is fear. But at the same time, there's a guy on Twitter named Perry Marshall, who asked what would happen if I suddenly became a theist. I think a part of it would be kind of like intrigued that that I was wrong and here's new information. So as long as I'm not thinking that I'm about to be punished forever, I think a lot of it would be I'm intrigued. This is a new this is something I didn't expect. So yeah, I hope I wouldn't be scared, and I would hope that if God knows me, He would know the appropriate response to that. But I did want to tell you the story that there was a pastor that I heard from about 30 years ago, who said that he was in an Islamic country for years, not just doing missionary work, but for the government. So he fell underneath USAID, and he was in this country where he was helping people for years, and he was surrounded by Islamic scholars. And so for years, the Islamic scholars would try to take the Trinity apart and try to take the Bible apart. And one of them said, what is going to happen to you is you are going to die, and you're going to wake up, and the first thing you're going to see is Jesus. The second thing is going to happen is that you're going to see that Jesus is furious at you. That's going to be the second thing, and the third thing is going to be that you understand Arabic, and Jesus is going to be screaming at you in Arabic.
Oh, wow.
That you made him a god when you knew you weren't supposed to, and he was just a prophet. And he's like, I want you to be prepared for this because this is going to happen to you. And this pastor who was talking to church said, I was terrified for years that would happen. And of course, the pastor said what finally broke him was he was like, I've known Jesus my whole life. Why would Jesus wait till then to tell me that it's actually Arabic and actually wrong? He's like, it doesn't make sense that Jesus would reveal that to me at that point. So he said, if it's so important, then Jesus would tell me now. That was his point. But ever since I was sitting in on that service about 30 years ago, I remember thinking that's a good answer, because it seems like Jesus would make that clear. It doesn't seem like he would wait till then to make this guy who spent his whole life helping people, suddenly make him terrified.
Yeah, I like you said earlier, most theologians have to be wrong.
Right.
And again, what on my worldview, I believe that, number one, that God has revealed truth to humanity, and He's given us the capabilities to discover that truth if we're careful, if we choose to take our thoughts captive and our emotions captive, the way we were raised captive. I think a lot of people hold their beliefs so emotionally. I was actually just recently accused from, because I argue that Calvinism is false, right? And they were saying, well, your arguments are so emotional. I said, no, my arguments are simply based on logic, but I am showing that a belief you hold dear and close to your heart emotionally,
Right.
that you're holding to that belief with emotion and not rationality. And so our beliefs, they can become very emotional. And it was hard for me. I mean, I think you were at, if you were going to turn our questions back on us, and Josh mentioned it, like, what would it have to be for me?
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I think I've said this publicly before, but I don't talk about it a lot. Man, my faith was shaken even as I was pursuing my master's degree at Biola University. And I'd say about halfway through, I was at such a low point. I don't think it ever dipped below 50%, but let's just say it dipped down in the low 50s. And that was because I was swimming in constant objections and the scholarly objections against God's existence and swimming in them. And it was emotional for me, but I always said I'm going to be more committed to truth than I am to any of my beliefs. And I'd say now, it's kind of like, Richard, what it's like to go to boot camp. I've heard that they just tear you down and then they build you back stronger than you ever were before. And I felt like that's what happened to me at Biola. By the time I graduated, I felt like I had been, that I was torn down and then built back up stronger than I ever was before, because it was now a reasonable faith. But, I do encourage people to, I guess, well, let me back up before I go on a side tangent. You were talking about what God would have to do and what you would expect him to do. And again, I think I agree with you, but I think he's done that, and he's given us the power to be able to think clearly, think rationally, to bracket our emotions. It's hard to do. It is so hard to do, to bracket our biases. But I know you do it. You make a practice of it, Richard.
I'll try.
And I know Josh and I try to do it too. Mike Licona says in his book on the resurrection that we all have biases. Christians, atheists, everybody in between. And we hold these biases. I mean, we can be very emotional about those. And he also says we can never escape them. No matter where you find yourself, now you've got a new bias, right? So you can never escape bias.
Yeah, I wanted to push that you can overcome one bias, but in so doing, you're going to create another one. You can't help but be biased.
Right. Yeah. So he says we can never escape it, but we can be careful and do our best to be as free as possible from our biases and our emotional beliefs. So
I agree with that.
I know you agree. That's why we get along so well. And I just encourage you and I and everybody watching to try to do that, to try to take our thoughts captive, our feelings captive, our emotionally held beliefs captive, and to just enter into cordial, respectful, loving conversations with people who disagree with you, and think the best of each other in the process. And
Absolutely.
Richard, I've just had our first time hanging out together a few years ago. You just impressed me. And I know even the students at Maven, when you go to speak to them, they fall in love with you. I know that you've seen so many of the students crying when you leave because they fell in love with you, and they're worried about your eternity. They're worried about your soul. And that's why when you leave and we talk, the kids so often will just keep crying because they just care about you so much. But it's because you showed that you cared for them.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful thing. You, more than anybody else I've ever seen this that would call themselves an atheist or agnostic, you provide an example that I hope everybody would look to and try to emulate, whether they're a Christian atheist or anybody in between. Right. And the last thing I'll say before I'll shut up, because I've talked for way too long now, is I've seen other people see that too. In fact, I was in Florida a couple of weeks ago speaking to a school there called the King's Academy.
That's where you and I were a couple of years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I was there again and talking with my colleague Dan Stewart. He's a teacher there, but also a chapter director with Reasonable Faith, who, by the way, I believe is leading the best reasonable faith chapters. He's got one for high schoolers, and then he has one for their parents, and just doing amazing work there. But you impressed him so much, he was asking me if you and I would be willing to go to West Palm Beach to the King's Academy and do this kind of a thing there. He said you don't want a debate, but a discussion between two of us who disagree on everything and show people how to do it in the right kind of way. Would you be willing to do something like that?
I'd love to. And you mentioned that on Facebook, and someone asked me on Instant Message, they said, what would you do? And I said, well, Tim Stratton would get up there and say that objective morality is true because Nazis were wrong. And then I would get up and say, okay, Nazis are wrong. I don't know if objective morality is a thing, but we would both agree to fight the Nazis. We would both say, hey, there's some Nazis, let's go get them. We would just have different reasons as to why we would. And that's why what we would talk about.
And that's why we'd make great neighbors. Is because even though I don't think you have a good foundation for your morality, we largely share the same morality. I would say the same thing to Mormons. You know,
we'd still chase Nazis.
That's right. That's right. We would fight to defend our neighbors.
Yeah.
Tim, your foundation is a maximally great being, and Richard's foundation is the maximally great Thomas Sowell. That's
all right.
I'm just kidding. I think I'll throw my hat into the ring here.
Okay.
With a few things before we close. One is Tim knows this. Not a lot of people know this, but I was in ministry and having like a crisis of faith, which is what led me to finding apologetic stuff. I know Sam Harris was a big influence on me. Now I read his stuff and I go, why was this a big influence on me? But he was, and then William Lane Craig kind of popped up out of nowhere on my YouTube, and I was like, oh, and then so I kind of was able to passionately pursue, okay, which actually made sense, because I'd always said I'd follow the truth where it would lead. And clearly I had incentives, and I'm not denying that, for remaining in the Christian faith. And I think I told Tim this, that I was going to hang on until I absolutely couldn't, like until there was a good enough reason to let go. And I never found that, and found the answers that I was looking for. So that's one thing. And people often will ask, well, then what would make you lose faith or choose to not be Christian anymore? And I go, well, I think the same thing the Apostle Paul said, that if it was shown that with beyond a reasonable doubt that Jesus Christ did not raise from the dead, then I would be free to abandon the Christian faith, because in our own scriptures it says that if he didn't raise from the dead, then our faith is null and void. So if it's proven that he didn't, then it seems to me that we have a falsifiable claim there, and right in our own scriptures. So that would be probably the biggest thing. And then the last thing I'll say was in regards to Jesus coming and showing the way and doing the thing, Richard, that you're asking God to do. The parable of the talents pops into my head. If you know the parable of the talents, where
I haven't heard that.
The parable of the talents is when Jesus is talking, and he says the kingdom of God is like a businessman. When you talked about being a CEO, he says a businessman who puts in charge his kingdom with 3 people. One he gives 10 talents, one he gives 5, one he gives 1. I might be getting the numbers mixed up there. I think it's 5, 2, and 1. It's 5, 2, and 1.
There's a lot of numbers in the Bible stories.
Yeah, it's 5, 2, and 1. And then
Yeah.
he says he's going to go away, and they're supposed to take care of it. Well, one guy doubles it, the next guy, so he gets 5 to 10. The next guy gets 2 to 4, and then one guy goes and buries it and doesn't do anything with it. And then when the master comes back, the one guy says, "Hey, look, I gave you 10. I got 10." He says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant."
Okay,
that's the story.
That one I know. Okay.
Yeah, that's the parable of the talents.
Okay.
So the last guy says, "I knew that you were a hard man, reaping where you did not sow," and it basically accuses him of being, of being somebody who should have a bad reputation, somebody who is, who has bad morals. Mm-hmm. And the response of the master is basically a sarcastic, "Oh, you knew that, did you? Well, then you would have done a different thing." Right? But really, you didn't know that. Really, you didn't know who I was. And so as I was thinking about that parable, like, my thought is, I think even Jesus is recognizing that the objection that you're saying there, Richard, that there should be a clear path. And Jesus is saying, I'm actually leaving that for you. Like, you can follow me and you can bear fruit, but be careful. If you misjudge who I am, when I return, you will be held into account. So that was just something that popped in my head. And there's going to be, I think you're right, there's going to be plenty of people. Even Jesus says, not everyone who says, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven. People will think they're following me, but they aren't actually, because they're not paying close attention to the path that I laid out, to who I said I was, which is why careful thinking is so important, and which is why we have these conversations now, and why my prayer is constantly. I'll let you in on a little secret. So we're a church group. I guess it's my turn to talk too long. We have a church group, and we're talking about evangelism. We're supposed to write down eight names that we're praying for. And your name was like the second or third one I wrote down.
Wow.
Because I care so deeply about you. And I'm like, if I truly believe in Jesus, and I truly believe that Richard should come to Christ, then he's somebody that I should be praying for. Even though we're going to have these conversations and we'll leave amicably, that's continually my prayer, because I don't want for when the master returns to be the time where all of your questions are then answered. Like, right. I don't want you to enter that moment in fear. I want it to be, oh, well, I was wrong. So that's my prayer. And hopefully that is received well. I would only share it if I thought it would be received well, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah.
It means a lot to me. I have a lot of Christians and Mormons that, in fact, I interact with Mormons more than Christians because my wife and I live in Mormon territory
Right, right.
in a small town in Arizona. But I get a lot of that, and some of it's very meaningful. Some of it, some of these people will come to my house even and say like, we've just been thinking about you and we just really want to keep talking to you. Um, and a lot of them are Mormons. So I think there's something about human nature where I think it's possible that I could come to believe that, that God exists. I'm not sure it would be Christianity, but it would be that before Mormonism. Like I would never think that Joseph Smith learned something and that he shared it with the world and that he was a good example to follow. That's just never going to happen. But I do see the sincerity of these Mormon people who are saying, and there was even a guy last year who was at the hospital and dying, did not know me except on Facebook. And he wanted to send me a message and reached out to another friend of mine on Facebook to make sure that, as he was dying in the hospital, that I had heard his story. And of course, it was very meaningful, powerful stories. So I take that to mean that people are sharing something that's deeply important to them, and that matters, and it could be true. The fact that I'm not going to become a Mormon doesn't diminish the fact that some of these people are really, sincere, and they're telling me powerful stories that matter to them.
Yeah, I love Mormons too.
Yeah,
my son's best friend.
Yeah, my son's best friend is a Mormon. So
another example, we can disagree and still love each other.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right, so let's close with this. What is one word or message of advice you would give to Christians who wants to talk to atheists like yourself? Now, so we're not talking about like the militant new atheists that are on YouTube, and so you want to get on there and debate. That's what I'm talking about. Just because what I've found is when I talk to atheists generally that aren't the terminally online ones, they're more like you than they are like Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give somebody to have those conversations?
Yeah, I would say, I almost have to say too, which is to know first if the person you're talking to is just dead set where they are, and they've just got this look on their face where they just want to keep bashing you, just recognize that and then just live your best life. That's the only thing you can do is live your best life. There's nothing they can do to mock you if you're taking care of your family and taking care of your community and working hard and just living a great life. Don't try to defeat those guys. Let them go through their own journey. And then my next thing is to, when you're talking to somebody, learn what's sacred to them. Because like we've been saying, learn what's the most important thing to them, and then see if they know why. See if they know why it's important. And then if Christianity is true, then you can work from there. Work on this thing that you see is unassailable to them, and see if you can find a way that might point to Christianity.
How about their disposition? How do you think people should carry themselves when they're?
See, now this is funny because I'm already a diplomat. That's who I am. When I joined the Marines, I was already a diplomat. And my dad, when I told my dad I was joining the Marines, he said, one of them is going to kill you. Not the enemy, but a Marine is going to be the one who, that's the first thing he told me. And that almost happened in Iraq. I almost had a warrant officer shoot me in Iraq because he was so upset with me. Now, he and I made up. And Iraq was a tough time. Yeah. But he was so upset with my diplomacy, whereas he was a warrant officer and I was a staff sergeant. And it should be, he says it, I do it, and less of an interaction. But it just was one of those things where I felt like it was important to speak up, and he showed me that it was not the time. But I'm a diplomat, so that's who I am. And so I realized that my diplomacy helps me get into some doors. Some people immediately distrust me because they're like, you're like a shrewd little snake. My thing is, choose what you are. If you're a diplomat, be that. And if you're not a diplomat, then be that, because it takes all time. It takes all kinds. I do know an atheist who became a Christian because the pastor, he went to go to a church to be a smartass. And the pastor said, there's no point in you coming here, man. You're just going to be like this. You're not welcome in our church. And that got the atheist's attention. Whereas if the pastor had said, hey, we love you, Jesus loves you, do your worst, then the atheist probably would have gone and just kept doing that. But that got the atheist's attention, and that was the stone in his shoe that led to his conversion. So I don't say
Stone
be a
in the
diplomat.
shoe.
Yeah, I don't say be a diplomat. I say find out what you are, and then stick with it. If you are a diplomat, some people are going to say that you're weak or that you're using your diplomacy to, to get to your own ends. Whatever. But if that's what you are, be that. And if you're a warrior, be a warrior, and then just take the hits that come with what you are.
Well, I always say, just take Patrick Swayze's advice. Always be nice until it's time not to be nice. So,
that's a good one too. That's a very good one. Yeah. Right, because even though I was a diplomat, there were some times where I had to lay down the law, and I did.
Yeah.
So
I know you did. As a Marine, you'd have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do want to thank you for joining us, Richard, and I also want to thank everyone for hanging out and being a part of this conversation. Please drop a comment. What are some things that really stuck out to you in this conversation? We'd love to have those conversation in the comments. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the little notification bell so you won't miss a show, all of that stuff. Thank you again, Richard, for hanging out with us. This was a really fun time.
Thank you. And I'm going to be debating Doug Groteis next month on morality. So, keep an eye open for that. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. And all of your links we'll put in the description. So once you get those to me, we'll put in the description. And do you know if that's going to be broadcast or?
It's going to be on a podcast on Bill Scott's podcast next month.
Awesome. Okay. So
nice.
be on the look for that. Bill Scott's a great guy. So, all right. And as we always say here at FreeThinking Ministries,
stay reasonable.